So this is a second video that I'm doing where I'm just talking about the early Beatles. I call it the Beatles in black and white. Why do I call it the Beatles in black and white? Because basically, Help seems to be the one where the movie is shot in color. They start playing around with different sounds where it sounds more like modern music. And the Beatles in black and white, these first four records, to me, sound like a different band. And I think they're harder to get into for a modern audience. And it really all started with me asking myself, I'm a pretty big Beatles fan. Like, why don't I listen to their first four records? And then, I can't think of another band that I'm a huge fan of that I would have box sets or outtakes, compilations, anthologies, books, whatever, that are concerned with the later records but never listen to the early ones. And so I just decided, why is that? Let me listen to these records. I haven't really listened to them. So I spent a lot of time starting probably last summer a little bit, and then recently with the four first Beatles records. So Please Please Me, With the Beatles, Hard Day's Night, and Beatles for Sale. So the first two, Please Please Me and With the Beatles, are in part one. I will link to that below. And this is the third record, Hard Day's Night. So let's start with this one. This is, of course, a soundtrack to a movie called A Hard Day's Night. Came out in 1964, I believe. I did not check on that. If I'm wrong, I'll put a little note on this. It's interesting because it's dominated by John Lennon songs. You can listen to the early Beatles and really, I think, come across going, okay, there's a clear leader, where that's not the case at all. And when you get into later Beatles albums, and some of their best ones are more dominated by McCartney, but he has a lion's share of credits on this, a lion's share of vocals anyway. The first side of the record is really the songs from the movie. The second side's definitely a little looser. Seems like it's kind of a clearinghouse for some songs. I know I've said this before. I said this in the last video, but for me, I get real the rockers I've just heard too many times, and that's a case here too. I love that opening riff of A Hard Day's Night. I don't really need to hear the song though. I mean, honestly, if it came on in the car, Sirius XM or radio station or something, I'd probably turn the channel. I've just heard it too many times. It's not fresh for me anymore, and it's just not that interesting to me. I realize when I'm doing this video, I am not, a person that grew up on the Beatles. I'm too young, to have these records be new. If they were, I think my mind would be blown, like a lot of people's are, that are older, that got into the Beatles in real time, by the advancement from album to album, and even the subtle differences between some of these early records. But yeah, a song like A Hard Day's Night and a song like Can't Buy Me Love, especially Can't Buy Me Love, I just I don't know. Yeah, I just don't care for it. Those are not the kind of songs I'm looking to these records for. Frankly, I was looking to these records to see if there were some gems I just didn't know about. And yeah, and here there are. I should have known better. Certainly don't know that one that well. It's a catchy little song, like just about every song on this record. It's boy girl relationships. They're very young. They're singing some pretty simplistic lyrics and some pretty simplistic ideas of love. But it's kind of cool. I should have known better. Yeah, I like quite a bit. If I Fell, I really like. There's great harmonies in here. I like how there's so much separation. I know like some people can't stand it. A lot of it's very pan to the right and left. I said this in the last video, but it's true. You can really make out the instruments. And the other thing that is really apparent to me when I listen to these is the harmonies. I think people that grew up with the Beatles, like I said, in real time, or spent a lot of time with the early Beatles, know those harmonies. They're lost in the later records. They're not really a thing as much. So that I find really interesting. Tell Me Why is another song in here, kind of poppy. You can see how these would work well in the movie, especially Tell Me Why and Hard Day's Night, Can't Buy Me Love, of course. But yeah, that first side I really like quite a bit. Second side's not quite as good. Apparently Lennon wrote a lot of these songs very, very quickly. Anytime at All is fun, kind of a little rocker. I'll Cry Instead is one of Lennon's kind of woman did me wrong, show you what a man can do. I don't know. Like when he gets back from tour, he's going to straighten things out. He comes back to this with When I Get Home. There's a whole lot of things he's going to tell his baby when he gets home. I don't know if that's good or bad. And then he talks about leaving his lover completely because she wronged him. You can't do that. I think one of these songs talks about him cheating on this person intentionally too, and getting every girl because he can, and she's SOL because she somehow treated him wrong. Yeah, he's a young dude. Would this kind of stuff fly today? Probably not, or it would be questioned for sure. I don't really agree with questioning an artist's intent. They can always be speaking about a character. We always think that it's just the person talking about themselves when it's a song. Kind of drives me nuts when people do that. I just did it. I'm guilty. Yeah, I like this record. It's not one that I would come back to a lot, but I do think it's one of probably the strongest of the four that I'm reviewing. Which brings us to Beatles for Sale. Beatles for Sale, their fourth album. Fourth album. We're doing UK albums, by the way. At some point, I might want to do just American ones, since I am a U.S. citizen. I grew up in the United States. It would be kind of interesting to listen to the records in the order and the way that they were brought to a U.S. audience sometime too. But for purposes of these videos, these two videos, I'm really just doing the UK, I guess, canon versions of these records. So Beatles for Sale came out December 1964. This was kind of, sort of Christmas product, or it was designed to be out in time for Christmas, even though they had an earlier record, Hard Day's Night, did come out in 64. They wanted to put this out in time for Christmas. And it's interesting that they had Hard Day's Night that had all original material on it, the first one to do so. And then they went and did this record, and almost half the songs are cover songs. Lennon had called it their country and western record, and that influence does show up a little bit on some of the songs on here. Especially the second side, I Don't Want to Spoil the Party, Every Little Thing. And there's some good rockers on here, No Reply, I'm a Loser. I think Paul McCartney steals the show with I'll Follow the Sun. I think there's like a really good EP in here, and I'll probably return to this record for some of the songs. I just, by this point, I don't know. I'm a little tired. I was tired of it. Modern audience, again, looking back at this, but I get a little tired of the rock and roll kind of covers. Like, rock and roll music, cool. I'm sure it was great in concert. I think it's one that they kept playing over and over, a Chuck Berry song. Mr. Moonlight, not sure why they exactly covered that. Kansas City, same thing. They just looking for material. Words of Love, the Buddy Holly song, I think is really cool. I really like that. And then they close with another Buddy Holly song, Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby. Or no, excuse me, Carl Perkins song, Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby. And it just seems very uneven. It's like they're trying these new directions. It kicks off in an interesting way with No Reply and I'm a Loser, but I think they kind of sound tired on this record to me. It doesn't feel like it's fully realized the way that some of their other records are, but it's definitely pointing in the direction of what's to come. And I don't know, yeah, maybe I'll warm up to it at some point. It's just having some of those songs that just seem like filler to me in the middle is just not something that I look for from a Beatles record. Again, looking back at these records that are classics to some people, but just kind of get lost in the shuffle, or people don't really pay that much attention to them today, to see if I can find something in here that I really like. And I have been surprised. There are some cool songs in here. I think I could definitely put together a really good playlist, but I probably will not be going back and reaching for Please Please Me with the Beatles, Hard Day's Night, or Beatles for Sale in the same way that I would something like, the White Album or Abbey Road or Revolver or Rubber Soul or even Help. They just seem a little, like I said, black and white, a little like a different, like the 60s hadn't really arrived yet. Like it's still 1964. It's still the countercultural revolution hasn't happened. It takes a while for a decade's influence to really kick in. I think that's, even though Beatlemania happened in 64, so the same year that this record came out, a little bit earlier, it still feels like from another time. It feels like you're listening to music or looking at music, especially those first couple albums. But I think even this one at times from a totally different era, from a black and white era, from almost like a 50s kind of hangover. But that would soon change, and I think they did it with help. But I'm really glad I went back and looked at these, and I would, obviously for anybody that's interested, I mean, they are the Beatles. You should spend a little time with their all their music. But again, if you were there, Oh, I'm sure it was absolutely amazing just seeing the differences, seeing every new album kind of reinventing themselves. Anyway, that's all I got to say about the Beatles in black and white for now. I will definitely talk more about the Beatles for sure, but want to focus on their early material, and that's what these two videos are about. Thank you, everyone.